Welcome back. This lecture continues our discussion of the board of directors of the corporation and specifically discusses how the board acts. But before we cover that, I want to talk a bit more about shareholder voting, specifically voting by proxy. So as you read for last time, shareholders may vote by proxy. In the context of public companies, shareholders will receive a card like this one in the mail. This is the proxy card for the 2020 Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting. This can be filled out and mailed back, but there's also options to vote over the phone and online. What happens is that when the shareholders complete this, they are designating the people named in the card to vote on their behalves according to their instructions. This is the front of the card. You can see here the shareholders will be designating Mark D. Hamburg and Walter Scott to be proxies for the 2020 meeting and for any adjournments thereof. This is the reverse side of the proxy card. Now notice the board nominees are up in the left-hand corner. This proxy card is typical in that it has the exact number of nominees to fill the exact number of board seats that are open. The options are to vote for those nominees or to withhold votes from those nominees or to withhold votes from an individually named nominee. Now take a look at proposal number 2. This is what we call a say on pay vote. This is required by the SEC. It's a vote on the compensation of the officers, but as it says here, it is non-binding. So even if there's a huge majority voting against this proposal, meaning that the shareholders do not agree, the compensation could still remain at that level. Because it is non-binding, the say on pay vote really has no teeth. The only real threat to the directors is that it's possible that the shareholders would not be happy with the directors going against the say on pay vote, and so that shareholders may not re-elect the same individuals the following year. Now, proposal number 3 is related to the say on pay vote. This is another requirement with respect to say on pay. It's how often the say on pay vote must be held. The options are yearly, biannually, or triannually. So those 3 proposals came directly from the corporation, from the board of directors. The 4th proposal is a shareholder proposal, which came from a shareholder. It's similar to many of the shareholder proposals that you heard during the Alphabet shareholder meeting. We'll talk more in detail about shareholder proposals in BA2 if you take that course. Now, one more thing, proxies like this one are revocable until they are cast. So if a shareholder changes their mind prior to the meeting and wants to submit another proxy, the latter dated proxy will control and will substitute the former proxy or proxies that had been submitted. I should make it clear here that in large publicly traded corporations, most shareholders are voting via proxy. They're not actually showing up to the shareholder meeting and voting. In addition, the proxy card is accompanied by a proxy statement, which actually includes a notice of the shareholders meeting in it. The proxy statement is required by the SEC. Okay, so once we have our board elected, the board must hold meetings in order to conduct business. So board meetings start at Section 820 and thereafter. Under Section 822, a notice of the date, time, and purpose are not required for regular meetings of the board of directors unless the articles or bylaws otherwise provide. But for special meetings, 48 hours notice is required unless the articles or bylaws otherwise provide. Under Section 824A, a majority of the board is required for a quorum. The articles or bylaws can make this number greater or lesser, but it cannot go below 1/3 of the directors. The board acts by a majority vote of those present, or the number of directors whose votes are required by the articles or bylaws, whichever number is greater. That's under Section 824B. And if they have a quorum when they begin the meeting and subsequently lose the quorum, then they can still do business. but only so long as the number of affirmative votes is not fewer than the number that would have been required had the quorum not been lost. So, by way of an example, let's say we have a board consisting of 11 board members. That means quorum is 6, majority of the board. If we have only 6 present, an affirmative vote would be 4, so majority of those present. Let's say one person leaves. We can still conduct business even though we don't have a quorum. Now, so long as we have 4 people voting in favor, we're good. But let's say that we only have 3. That's majority of those currently present, but that won't be sufficient. You should also be aware that the board can act by written consent under Section 821 if each director delivers a written consent to the corporation. So if you look at Part B of 821, that reveals the consent must be unanimous. And also the board can hold meetings via conference call or other similar technology. And I should say that this often happens. Under Section 812, board members can vote by proxy only if the Articles of Incorporation allow for this. Now, in the context of a board meeting, our proxies are generally going to be a little bit different than they would be for the shareholders meeting that you just looked at. A board member will just tell another board member how he or she would like to vote on a specific matter. In order to appoint a proxy, the director would have to provide a signed writing to whomever is presiding at the meeting. Under Section 825, the board can designate committees which consist of 1 or more directors. If non-directors are on the committee, they serve only as advisors and don't count as 1 or more directors. If a committee is designated, then they have the powers of the board of directors. Except under no circumstances can the committee engage in the activities listed in Part E. So they may not authorize or approve distributions unless they're doing so according to a formula or method or within limits that were prescribed by the board of directors. In addition, they may not approve or propose to shareholders actions that this chapter requires be approved by the shareholders. They also may not fill vacancies on the board of directors or adopt, amend, or repeal bylaws. I should note here that the board committees are extremely common, particularly in public companies. In fact, the SEC rules and exchange listing standards require that there be certain committees. More specifically, an audit committee, a compensation committee, and a nominating corporate governance committee. The audit committee is just as the name suggests. They oversee the company's auditors and the financial statements and internal audits. The compensation committee basically oversees executive officer compensation, including policies relating to compensation. And the nominating corporate governance committee identifies qualified people to be on the board. They select and recommend nominees. They also will develop corporate governance guidelines, and they'll oversee evaluations of the board and management.